Hello, everybody. My name is Dylan Stiles, and I'm your host for Queering the Air, a queer political podcast to talk about the intersection of queerness and politics in Australia. Today, I am very excited to welcome Ethan Mileikowski, former council candidate for the Reason Party and volunteer coordinator. Welcome, Ethan.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
Ethan, this whole podcast talks about the importance of queer representation in politics, and you yourself have ran as a candidate, but I wanted you to kind of introduce yourself a little bit about your story and your journey to being the proud queer person you are today.
It's an interesting question, and it's because it's not as much of an exciting journey as I think a lot of people have, but at the same time, I think it's very special and it's very me. So I first came out when I was in year 9, so I was about 14. And I remember telling my mum, that whole walking up to her room and knocking on the door and, Mum, I'm gay. And her just being like, all right, and me going, so what's for dinner? So in a way, it's really never mattered at all to my family or to my friends. I went to a wonderful progressive Jewish high school where sort of being gay was more normal than being straight. And yeah, I was always surrounded by a group of people where your sexuality was your least important factor. It really never mattered. What you believed and what you did was always so much more significant. And yeah, and I think that's also part of how I have developed my identity as well. That's how I see it.
Fabulous. And I guess, how did that Ethan, from being at the Jewish school and coming out to their family, then get involved in politics?
I had always been a bit of a history nerd, but I think then it was sort of a natural progression from that. I always was very passionate about issues, and I always saw history as the context of all our issues, which it really is. And I think most people want to do good in the world. Doing good in the world or making the world a better place is a very broad and very easily identifiable thing. But for me, politics was always the most effective way to do it. Whether you love it or hate it, government is in every single person's life and generally affects them every single day. And so it's actually the most effective way to make a difference because it's so large. And yeah, that's it really. It was just the best way to change the shit in the world.
And then I guess, why Reason Party? What got you to that point?
I hadn't exactly heard of the party till about 2018, when actually the rebranding happened. So I wasn't really a sex party fan. I came in just after Reason was formed. And the first way I actually heard of the party was by going to Fiona Patton's book launch. If you haven't read it already, Sex, Drugs and the Electoral Roll. Wonderful title, wonderful book. And it wasn't just what she was talking about. I really resonated with the issues she was talking about and sort of her mind and the way she responded to them. But it was the way she was talking about them as well. She was answering like a normal human being. And that was so incredibly refreshing. I remember sitting there and hearing a question from an audience member, and Fiona really genuinely just going, I don't know the answer to that. And that shocked me. That rocked my world, particularly considering, the only experience I had with a politician was year 10 work experience with Tim Wilson. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Fiona was just normal. She was cool.
I like it. She was normal. She was cool. I outlined to you before we started the podcast that I'm a big Fiona fan. I also have her book, and I have read it, and I've also loved it. So I am with you there. Straight into the second question. Is there someone who you look up to as a role model or mentor who's kind of helped you on your journey to being a proud queer person and then being a proud queer person in politics?
This one was a really interesting one when I first read the question. A bit of a different answer, I feel. And for the first half of that question, I'm going to say no, that there wasn't anyone who helped me. I had to figure it out for myself. And I think a lot of people will understand what I mean by that. It wasn't as simple as, you know, unfortunately, I didn't have a, queer role model in year 9 when I was 14. There wasn't anyone. I just had to figure it out with those around me. And I think it took me a long time to figure it all out exactly. And for me also to be proud. I think those are two very different things. And I don't think I did that with anyone's help. That was just a me thing. In terms of being in politics as a proud gay person, there are quite a few people. A good friend of mine, Rachel Payne, who you may have heard of, she also ran as a council candidate in Moreland. She was general manager of the Eros Association, so the lobby group for the adult industry. And she is just the most powerful person you will ever meet. I mean, her council candidacy picture was just her with nipple tape on. And so there's been quite a few people, and I think I've learned how they have integrated their queerness or their gayness into their political identity. And that's been something really interesting for me. And I think it's also something, again, that I'm slowly learning.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. I think that's very amazing. And I quite like that you kind of looked at other people who are following similar experiences around that, running for council. I know I did that myself. So completely understand where you were coming from on that end. And then I guess I'm very intrigued, I guess, from your perspective as a former candidate, but also within the Reason Party. I guess what kind of barriers do you see for participation of queer people involved in politics? And then how do you think we can best overcome them to increase queer representation on all levels of government, so state, federal, and local?
Sure. I think I'll answer that backwards. So first, how we can better improve representation. I think for each of those levels, it's a very different approach. I would say very strongly that local government needs a reinvigoration diversity-wise across the board. As you know, we have more councillors above the age of 75 than below the age of 25. And I find that incredibly problematic. I think representation of women, of young people, of gay people, of ethnic minorities isn't good enough, quite frankly, in local government. Not that it is any better on any other level, but in particular, councils are poorly lacking. What we do about that, I don't know. I think it's advocacy, it's organizations like the Pride Lobby, it's education, it's making sure that we equip candidates with the confidence and the skills. And that, I think, is key, is that confidence bit, because I think the only thing holding people back, particularly gay people and particularly young gay people, is fear. It's fear that your identity will be part of some sort of campaign. It's that's the thing that's going to hold you back. When really and truly, most people don't really think anything of it. It's not a positive thing. It's not a negative thing for a campaign. In fact, it wasn't something I even spoke about at all during my campaign. It was just there. And I think people need to realize that, and I really dislike this idea that diversity only exists for the sake of diversity. The evidence actually tells us the opposite, that diverse decision-making bodies make better and longer-term decisions. And so I think people need to consider their identity as a benefit for representing their communities. And as we're slowly learning, and again, going back to those organizations, a particularly inspiring one has been Women for Election Australia, because they've realized that most women out there have the skills already to be incredible representatives. They just don't have the confidence. And I think that's very sad, but there's definitely things we can do. So it's training, it's understanding, and it's promotion. We need to talk about queer candidates and women running for office.
Yeah. And I guess I am intrigued about maybe state, because you've got Fiona Patton, who is a fantastic candidate, but are we going to see more queer representation across the Reason Party running at the next state election? And then I guess we've got a federal election now only a few weeks away. And are we seeing any great queer candidates from the Reason Party running there?
We get to promote. Oh, how exciting. You're too kind. I get to talk about our incredible candidates for the federal election. So our candidate, we are very, very proud to have a proud transgender woman running for us for the Senate in New South Wales. She's second on our ticket. I'm also proud to say that I helped nominate her because I thought that she would just do such a fantastic job, and she has. Hannah Ma, I'll name drop her. She's a country transgender woman, so more representation for us, and particularly for those out in the country who feel like they don't have a voice. And I think when we look at suicide and depression rates among the transgender community in the city and then out in the country, it's incredibly sad. And so having somebody who is out and proud, I think, really makes a change. Because as we always say, you can't be what you can't see. We also have former CEO of the Australian Women's Chamber of Commerce, Yolanda Vega, running for us as our Senate candidate in Victoria. And she's worked with the LGBTQI community for a long time. She helped work on a campaign to remove transgender women from men's prisons in Queensland. She has worked very closely with the queer community. She has an upcoming art exhibition as a fundraiser that includes many fantastic queer artists, lots of erotic art, as you'd expect. And is it something that we can see at the next state election? Absolutely. Reason has a lot of queer and gender diverse members, and we have a lot of queer and gender diverse members who are very keen, and I think we try and empower as much as possible. We're actually, and people are often fascinated by this, our membership is mostly male and it's mostly older. It's just mostly male and older gentlemen who couldn't care less about promoting fantastic female and gender diverse candidates for election. And I love that. I love that we have a, almost 50-50 split on our management committee. We've had transgender members serve on our management committee and our policy committees. We had not just myself, but another gay candidate, Jeremy Cowan, running in the council elections. It's, we were a sex party. Sex is a big thing for us still.
And do you think there is any additional barriers for state and federal entry? So we've talked a lot about the barriers for local. Is there any additional ones, do you think, for state and federal?
I think everything I discussed locally is probably still relevant for the state and federal parliament. It's just that sense of confidence or lack thereof that's holding people back. But I think the other thing, and obviously it's a big thing because of the issues that are discussed on these various levels, is unfortunately, I wouldn't describe federal parliament as necessarily a safe space for particularly transgender individuals these days. And I think that's quite sad. And I think that's obviously something that holds people back. Why on earth would you want to be elected to a body where they debate your existence? And I think that's very, very sad. I don't think that's as much in state parliament. We're lucky to live in an awfully progressive place. But in federal parliament, it's a discussion that they think should happen. And that's atrocious.
Yeah, yeah. I'll move you along to our next question, which
Sure.
is you're a young person, you've entered politics at a young age, you've ran as a council candidate when you were 18. But what advice would you give to a queer person who's looking at entering into politics?
Tough question. Don't let any of the shit hold you back. And to be perfectly honest, I think that's what I'd say to anybody. And this is the thing. I don't know how much my advice would change depending on somebody's identity. Like, I think these are all very, very relevant things, no matter who you are. And I think, yes, we don't have enough queer people in Parliament, but we also particularly don't have enough young people. And it's for what I'd say is the exact same reasons, is that they don't feel that they are good enough. When, as I said, we need their representation in order to make better decisions, in order to make decisions that reflect the community. And so I think that's what I would tell a young queer person interested in politics is that their voice actually, and again, the evidence tells us this, will make the country a better place, simply by being in the room. And I think as well, a lot of people have this very warped idea of running for office as winning at all costs and only for winning scenario. I think very early on, I knew I wasn't going to win my council run, and I was very okay with that. If you ask me now, I have every single councillor's phone number in my phone. I've worked with them since on policy. I've gone for coffee with them. I count some of them as my friends. And so as an opportunity to develop yourself, not just by running, but by getting involved in politics is massive. It's so significant. And particularly if you find a group of people like I found with Reason, who trust you and who have the confidence in you, that can just do wonders professionally and personally.
Amazing. My next question, I'm not sure how much time you have to watch movies and watch TV shows because you're busy, running as candidate or coordinating election campaigns for the Reason Party. But my next question is, who is your favorite queer character in a TV show or movie and why?
So there are two answers I could give. If you ever watch Doctor Who, what's his name? Captain Jack. I think he would be my favorite. I also did love Renly Baratheon in Game of Thrones, but I think that was more of a crush. And then the other one that I've always said was my sexual awakening was Ian Gallagher from Shameless. For sure.
And is it because it was a sexual awakening to why they're your favorite? Or is it how they're portrayed, their story, their arc?
I always thought Renly was portrayed in Game of Thrones as, especially if you're thinking about Game of Thrones and all the people who went for the Iron Throne are just awful, awful people. And Renly was probably the only one who was portrayed as kind. And I think, when we, obviously not all gay people are kind, but I think when you think about, sort of emotional trauma and emotional intelligence and all that sort of thing, I thought it was a really nice representation. And everybody around him, he was kind as well. And I thought that was, a kind person deserved to be king. And that was like this radical thing. Yeah.
I love it. Well, we're now at the end of the podcast, but I guess I'll just turn to you. Is there any final thoughts, comments you want to share with our listeners? And then I'll wrap us up.
Be an active citizen. Be engaged. Research who you're going to vote for. Don't just vote the way your parents tell you to vote. And get involved. Hand out on election day. Letterbox for somebody. It's worth it.
Yeah. Well, Ethan, thank you so much for joining us for our episode of Queering the Air with the Reason Party. I would like everyone to please check us out on all of our podcast channels and on all of our social medias. We are on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And I want to thank every single person who's listened today. And we look forward to tuning in with you next time with Liberal Pride. Thank you, everyone. Bye.